boys. Good boys. It's nice, isn't it, eh? I'm really lucky that I've lived in Gloucestershire all my life, and I've been able to carry on some of the old ways. These days, and now I've got to this age, I can relax in what I want to do and live how I've always wanted to live, and also share it with my visitors and hope that they can take a little bit of my countryside away with them. Wassail. It's derived from Anglo-Saxon as far as we know, wassail. So it's a toast and you're wishing people good health and happiness really. The wassail always happened, I think, in the winter months when it was dark and they were lacking light and they wanted to be reminded of the summer. It's a sort of like a prayer for the weather, which would be good for the crops, which is going to sustain you through the winter. When we go to Maysmore, some of the same musicians go off to that as come to mine and the other ones. And it's our little wassail season. There are people gathering from the village. Who's emceeing you?
You?
No, I'm not.
You're retiring?
Well, I can.
Some toast to put in the trees to represent the corn harvest. The ladies have to put that in the trees. Okay, off we go then. All right?
Yeah. We go off to the orchard. We got some cider.
It smells good.
The amber liquid. We gather round an old apple tree in a circle near Maysmore Court. Speech to the tree now.
Old apple tree, we wassail thee.
The speech to the tree at Maysmore very often being Jeremy Chamberlain from the court, and he'll dress up in his top hat and tail coat, which makes him look like the squire.
And shout out to thee. Wassail! Wassail!
We got some cider to pour around the tree, which is a sort of symbol of giving some of it back to the land and not just taking everything, but being good to the land.
Apple tree, we wassail thee, and hope that thou wilt bear hatfuls, capfuls, 3 bushel bagfuls, and a little heap under the stairs.
If somebody fires a gun, which is supposed to frighten off the evil spirits.
Now I think to a close, except for the man with the gun. I'm sure we'll have a good crop of apples next year. Oh yeah. Well, should we water in the tree first?
Do you want to walk?
No, we won't.
Wassail, wassail, a jolly wassail, and joy shall go with our jolly wassail. We're a very tight family as far as geography is concerned. We're all west of the Severn. All my relations on my mother's side and my father's side had some connection with the land. And some of it was a little bit more tenuous than others, like a landlord of the local pubs or hotel on my mother's side. They moved to the George Hotel in Newark. They had fields around the town where they would have grazed the horses which were used for the transport. The vegetables and things would be grown in the gardens. It all goes back to the land really. My grandfather had become apprenticed to Brays, who had draper shops in Malvern, Ledbury and Newent. So he was a hoser and a hatter and a haberdasher. Then he became an undertaker as well, so he encompassed the whole lot. He did very well and then started farming, and he was interested in producing pigs. I've got prize cards that he won back in the sort of 1920 era. My grandfather made quite a success out of farming, and my father from a young age he developed an interest and carried it on. Eventually he had his own dairy farm and was milking cows. And of course it was a tie-up cowshed, and the sort of Sauce dairy went, sort of primitive dairy was at one end. Then he would milk the cows by hand very early in the morning. Then that milk would be transferred into the churn, and he would get the horse and harness it up and put it in the milk float and then drive up into Newent and sell the milk. And I can remember that quite clearly, going round with the horse on the milk round. My father bought a bunch of cattle from Andrew Higgins, who was one of the big cattle dealers at the time. They came by rail to Newent Station, so I can remember the cattle in the cattle holding pens at Newent Railway Station, and then they came down the street, brought them down the street, and they were turned out at the back of the land where Budgeons is now. They're willow trees, and we always call them withy. Never use the word willow. John's just taking the tops off these, which is called pollarding. Normally it would be a much bigger tree. These are some young trees which are just tidying them up. They'll shoot again, and it'll gradually build that crown up on the top of the stem. In the old days, before the chainsaws, of course, they would use axes, and they've got different size axes, of course, different weights, like a 4-pound axe, a 6-pound axe. The bigger the weight of axe to cut the bigger stuff. Then you want to cut the stuff out, and so then you would use a bill hook, which you could cut all the smaller pieces out. Well, John can do it so much faster. The chainsaw just melts through it, but it makes a bigger mess quicker. Well, we're laying this hedge down so that it'll go on another 40 years or so with good maintenance. It's just to get a good bottom in it. It'll let a lot of light in, and then out will come the shoots at the bottom, and it'll get thicker. They use a chainsaw all the time now. Years ago it would all been done with axes and bill hooks. Children were allowed to go off from school to help on the land in times of big work on. The thing was, the weathermaid played a big part, and they had to try and get the different jobs completed by the time the weather changed, and of course they got no means of doing it, only by hands. Our main thing was running home after school because there was something exciting happened on the farm. It was the harvesting or the threshing, and we wanted to be there to help kill the mice and the rats when they ran out from the stumps. We'd say, oh, they're cutting the corn up at so-and-so's. It used to go round like a telegraph, and then we'd all go off with our sticks and our bicycles, tie the stick onto the crossbar, and off we'd go to where they were, and then most of the farmers would let you in because you were going to kill some vermin, you know. And then you sort of wait, and as the patch got smaller, so the rabbits were under more pressure, and even a fox or two as well. And then they would come running out, and then the call was, Harry, Harry, Harry. You know, Harry and the animal, really, I suppose that is. But we used to shout, Harry, Harry, Harry. You know, we used to chase these things and jumping over the sheaves that were lying on the ground, sometimes catching your foot and going headlong. We'd be there and want to go under a sheaf of rabbits sometimes. It was we were horrible, weren't we? And then we used to surround the sheaf, like 3 or 4 of us, to try and catch the rabbit, you see, and we'd make a plunge onto the sheaf, you know, and underneath the sheaf with our hand and grab the rabbit and knock it on the head, and see how many we could get. And of course, if we killed a rabbit, we had a stick we used to mark the stick with a knife. All kids carried knives then. You know, older children pretty well all carried a knife, and used to have a log along the stick, you know, marker, to keep a tally. You say, I got 20 on my stick, you know, I mean, if you've got only 18, you know, that sort of thing. And it was good fun. It was exciting, you know. When I was small, there was loads of people working in the fields. All the arable fields, there was people hoeing the crops, and that was one of my first jobs when I left school. Well, you might have heard the term of putting the colt on. When they were breaking a colt in, they had 2 experienced horses, usually on one each side, and they put the colt in the middle. The older horses kept him in check, you know, while he was learning what he should do. So, of course, what happened? Cecil went in front because he was the fastest. Joe went behind me, and I was in the middle. I always had Joe right on my backside, you know, pushing in there. I was struggling to try and do this job skillfully. Cecil had got this way, the deft way he used his wrists and that. You could just do it as though it was nothing, you know. And he was very skilled at all the old things. We're up on May Hill near Newent, and this is a regular occurrence on May Day at about 5:20. People gather up here to wish goodbye to the winter and hello to the summer, bring the summer in. Something that's been revived in the 70s, and it's happened every year since then. I got this bit of greenery around me, this old withy. It's a sort of symbol of the spring. I have dressed up as Jack in the Green, and of course he's peeping out from the trees, keeping an eye on everybody. A sort of countryside version of the Green Man that you find carved on stone in churches. When I was sort of in my teens, I suppose, then the change started. Most young people now wouldn't be able to recognise really. I mean, the fields are still there, hedges are there, not so many, not the smaller fields like there were. The ricks disappeared, the horses went, so it was tractors, so they were able to do the transport easier and in larger amounts. I've always remember my father saying in 1936, life got worth living after the Depression because, and really at the bottom of that, you see, was of course they started making munitions. When the war broke out, of course, we were short of food straight away with the German submarines blockading to starve us. We had to produce more in this country. We had to grow certain crops for the war effort to produce food here. Lots of the old pastures were ploughed up. That was the biggest blow to the daffodils around here, was when the ploughing started. There was a lot more production because the grass fields had been turned over. The animals got less because they had to be fed. That was the death knell for a lot of breeds of cattle then. I started to do poultry because that was a way to be at home and find something that I could do, you know. The house was in the market square. Mother was doing her poultry in the orchard up at the back, and I was of course rearing some birds in some of the other sheds there. It was a gradual transition from mother's domestic pin money to me trying to earn a shilling or two to pay me keep and that. The actual poultry processing started not very far from the old half-timbered cottage that stands behind Albion House. Out in the countryside there, because they hadn't got electricity. And that was how we got introduced to plucking poultry with a machine. Because we had the electricity and somebody had got the machine, and they used to come from Lancashire to buy poultry and all that after the war. And my brother came back from the army and he helped, and off we went. We'd had the EC regulations come in at the 15th of August 1979. That is absolutely branded into my memory, really. That was a day when everything changed. Yeah, that was. Well, a lot of the old ways weren't allowed anymore. It was a different outlook altogether, and you were almost like using one evil to get rid of another evil. You know, getting rid of the dirt by using water, which actually wetted the meat, and then you couldn't hang the bird. So then the birds were disposed of almost immediately. So your stock was being replaced very quickly. So you had to have more coming in, more pressure, and the whole thing got faster and faster and faster. That was something I had a job to cope with, really. I'm naturally a slowish sort of person. I went back to things that were more extensive after I packed up in the business, but that was 1988. The Bear Breed Trust was formed in 1972. It was 1973, so there was a space there, you see, with going from one extreme to another, and having a job to cope with this thinking, you know, both the thinkings of it, trying to produce a mass-produced article for the general public to have cheap food, and also being interested in something that was much deeper, I think, in me, really. I was only really interested in our local county ones. That was my big thing, was that. I've always been a Gloucestershire man, and I suppose it's something naturally in you anyway, when all your family have always been here on all sides. Proud that we got our own breeds, still not gone extinct, and we got sheep, we got cattle, and we got pigs, which is unusual. There's not many counties got all three now. Oh, I love the Rylands. I really fell in love with them. I always look to the Cotswolds because they are a Gloucestershire breed, but they're mainly on the Cotswolds. But the old Rylands are West Gloucestershire and Herefordshire is their original home. Yeah, they're so trusting and they love human company. They seem to be wanting to be round the buildings. They don't like going away down on some isolated fields. They like to be up where people are. They used to call them the people that kept them wheelbarrow farmers. And I think that's because they developed on smallish holdings. That's partly why they've become so quiet, I suppose. They're just ready for shearing. In fact, they need shearing now. I've just got these little treats to make sure that they don't decide to walk off, really. We don't keep a dog as a sheepdog. I got a rescued dog. He's obviously a collie. He's got the instincts, but he hasn't had the training. It's useful to be able to draw them to a bucket because it saves you running around and pushing them. They lead much better than they drive. It's always nice to do it the easy way and without trouble to them and getting them all stressed and everything. I think it's just the way. It's just stockmanship, really, I think. They all need the wool off pretty prompt now, but there is a resistance among these shearing chaps. They are quite hard work because of the corners you've got to go round. They've got wool right down to their toes and right down to their noses, and their little ears are sticking out from the wool. You gonna talk to me? You talking? Eh? Yeah. The Gloucester Old Spots, well, they got a good following, and it's not a general public following. Supermarket sales don't suit the type of meat because it's rather on the fat side. When they were on the decline, They were fed mostly with barley meal and things like that, and sharps, which was another throw out from flour making. Of that was all very fattening. When you fed a more balanced ration with the protein in it, you didn't get that fat build up quite so much. But you've got to watch it now, because they're quite greedy. They will eat more if you put them more. My grandfather had bought some at a sale in the sort of 20s. There wasn't a lot moving on the road as far as transport of animals, so you dealt locally. This lad had the job to walk him back to the farm because it wasn't that far. And he said, oh, it was a nightmare, he said. He never forgot that. Trying to walk him, you see, because there's a little saying that Gloucester spots won't be drove. They got very low-slung ear, you see, which cover their eyes. Hence their hearing is not very good, their sight is not very good. They rely on smell mostly. They're probably the most difficult English breed of pig, I expect now, to drive. You have to train them if you want to show them. They're very patient, but they can be very, very stubborn as well. I was a founder member of the Gloucester Cattle Society, which we formed to register the cattle so that we could do some formal breeding. Once you've lost a breed, you lose the genes that it contains. So most people will understand that that's probably a valuable thing to be doing, is to keep them for genetic variation. You mightn't see a need for that particular quality at the time, but in years to come, things might change. The Gloucester cattle were almost extinct 100 years ago. They were the plaything of the aristocracy, really. The commercial farmers are trying to make a living out their land. They'd gone off their farms. There was one or two old-fashioned, awkward people, like the Dowds was at Whitcourt, who finished up with almost the last herd. If it wasn't for them, there wouldn't be any. We were sort of rounding up what we could find. The main nucleus was this last sale at the Whitcourt, Arlingham, which was the Dowdswell sisters, when they couldn't look after them any longer, and they were really deteriorating then. We've been ever since trying to purify the breed, not by bringing anything in from outside, but by trying to select inside the breed. The bulls are very docile, but that led to the bull handler in the market, who used to deal with all the old bulls coming in who were not very happy, some of them. He was skilled at unloading and loading them and that, you know, and he said to me, what are the old Gloucester bulls like? I said, oh, go on quiet, Dolph. And he said, you beware, my boy. More people were killed with quiet ones than ever there were with wild ones. And it was something I never forgot. And he's quite right, because you trust them, you see, if they're quiet. We had this rare breed scheme come out. I favoured selling them to a local butcher. So Paul Gurney had started up, and he was looking for ideas. I encouraged him to start selling some rare breed meat, local breeds and that, and he did, and he still does. We've been showing the Gloucester cattle, mainly the Three Counties show, ever since 1974 up till now. The showing always encourages people to look after the animals better and sets an example for other people. Whitcourt Molly is one of the original cows that came from Whitcourt, very much a dairy type Gloucester, because there was a connection with the making of the Gloucester cheese originally. I actually milked 6.5 gallons in a day from her, which was an incredible amount of milk from a Gloucester. And that had almost been lost really with the Gloucester breed. They hadn't been selected for milk. Jonathan Crump, who of course went to Whitcourt and restored the Gloucester herd there, was very interested in making cheese from the milk of Gloucester cattle because of the historical connection. I wouldn't have been able to manage as long as I did without my son, Clifford, and he's now doing quite a lot with the society. I can back out now when I want to, really, and he'll take them over. Bring up the cider, bring up the cider. Albert, Pete and myself, of course, we made this cider last year. Now we're tasting it. 12 months since it was pressed. And it's really good. The cider making was a bit of a sort of a revival. There was no cider made here for years before. And of course, being me, I always want to try and keep these old crafts going. Albert, who's now doing all of it really, he's very interested in the old pieces of kit and restoring them and using them. Enthusiasts thing. It developed because we joined the Three Counties Cider and Perry Association, which all came along with the revival of cider making. Then you get involved in more technical things and talks and talking as well with other people. Albert's picked up a lot of knowledge. To think that it's still happening here, that's what I get my pleasure out of. And seeing the old kits that he uses. It's got what was an old horse-drawn one. First of all, you wash your apples because cleanliness is very important to get a good result and a good keeping quality of the cider. You tip them into the hopper, they go down through what we call a scratter, which has got sort of spikes on it, which smashes the apples up. And then they run through 2 big stone rollers, which smashes them more. You shovel that out then, and you put it into cloths, which used to be called hairs, and I think originally they were made from horsehair. There were so many horses in the countryside. The cheese is several of these things. You spread your cloth in the press, then you tip the mulch in there, fold the sides over in the corners, and you make a nice envelope of it. Not to fill it too full so that it bulges when the pressure comes on and that. And then you put another one on top and you try to build this nice square cheese.
That'll be alright. That'll be alright.
And then when you drop the boards on the top and the weight on the top, it will stand up to the pressure. It's lovely when the juice first comes out. And that'll start really pouring out into a tray, which of course used to be stone, horse worked ones. You have as little contact with metal as possible so that you don't get corrosion. Stainless steel would be alright. And you bucket it out then into a funnel, or what we called a tundish years ago, which was made of wood.
It's got stale fruit, but actually that is the tannin in the fruit.
And it starts to ferment because it's got the natural yeasts off the surface of the apples when they've been out in the fields, because the yeast spores are in the air and on the grass, and that's usually sufficient to get a good fermentation. Pete's the most regular helper that comes up on a weekend. He's also got quite a good sort of application of his cider mind, measuring the gravity of the juice and all this sort of thing. If the juice is quite sweet, very often that will make strong cider because the yeast changes it from sugar into alcohol, which is all natural, and people years ago, I suppose, didn't know why, but they just knew how. And they had to do a certain thing because that produced something different to another, or better than another. Yeah, Pete enjoys it. He loves coming up. Then we get 1 or 2 other people who want to come and just try it out, perhaps, for, they just like the idea of doing it. And then some have gone away and made their own, so it's all a matter of spreading the word.
Use both hands, just. That's it.
See it starting to go? Wow, you're doing that!
Well done, Jess. Keep going.
In Gloucester there's a folk museum, which is a lovely place. They've got a cider mill, which is stone, with the horse goes round and round and pulls a big stone wheel round. And then they've got an old wooden press. And we take a bit of equipment in, the sort of sundries that they haven't got. And they love seeing the horse. That's I think that's the main thing. And it's a very simple bit of education really about country life as it used to be for city dwellers. There had always been orchards here until they were grubbed up. All around here there was lots of perry orchards and apple orchards. It was just nice to recreate one. I thought I ought to plant the local ones and try and preserve a few. That's our wassail tree there, the leathercoat russet. It's having a bit of a year out. It's got a few on it. But these old-fashioned varieties, they have a year's rest occasionally. You know, they're sensible. They don't just keep going all the year, every year. You'll get some hanging on there right till the beginning of January. And they're a very good keeper, they are. A lot of these old apples have got their own little property. Some weren't any good when you picked them. They were okay if you kept them. And when they used to pile them under the trees for the cider, they wouldn't put them through the press immediately. They left them to herd, as they called it. You get chemical changes in the apples then. This is a red Longdon. There's also a green Longdon, a Winnels Longdon as well, and I imagine it derives from Longdon village. I used to think that, because we didn't travel very far when I was a kid, you know, a Longdon, I mean, it's a long pear. It's a Longdon, you know. They tried growing them down in Somerset, but very unsuccessfully though. They seem as though they seem to like living up here. These old pears do. They're beautiful pears, aren't they? I'm not sure what it'll be like inside, but yeah, that one's going more now, look. And that brown will gradually creep right through the flesh, and that some you will cut and they'll be absolutely brown, but that doesn't mean they aren't any good. They're still all right for making perry. We're going to make some here for our own pleasure, really, is keeping the tradition going. Ploughing matches, they're a thing handed down from the past. Because of die-hard country people, some of them have survived. Not many in Gloucestershire now, but Herefordshire are very good at keeping their country things. They've got an association of the village ploughing societies, so they have a sort of a series of these things, and they start usually at the beginning of September and they finish in the middle of October. Very short season, and they're packed in every weekend then. They're organised by the society, and they get judges and they get stewards. And this big day arrives, and they have usually one or two marquees. This is a lovely day when country people come together, and you get a bit of the old world really there. There's one society called the Trumpet Agricultural Society, which covers a certain area, a radius of the Trumpet Inn on the Leominster Road. Usually it's the best attended horse ploughing event in the county. It's a very relaxed affair really, but very concentrated by the skills that they're using. If you look at an old plough, a horse plough, it's just like a few pieces of metal, a lot of people would say, sort of fixed together, but it is very complex to produce a very straight furrow, a level furrows, not too deep and then too shallow, but an evenness and tidiness of at the ends where you come out on a turning area called the headland to take your plough out at the right time. There are points given for all these different things. Usually You don't stop. The stopping and the starting again can make a kink in it. You look back when you get the other end. A man who's been trained properly can tilt that plough over so as it's running on the narrowest part. If he's a really skilled man, he isn't touching those handles with his hands. See the ease of that turning? Didn't use his hands at all on the plough, just sitting on the plough, leaning it over, and he turned on that little tiny bit of ground. So it was less effort for the horses and less effort for himself. You're saying about turning on the headland, and if you're working all day in a field and you're ploughing an acre or more with 2 horses in a day, acre and a half, that's a long way. I think to plough an acre you walk about 22 miles. You don't want to be wasting effort on the ends. Not too happy. They're young horses by the look of them. He isn't worried about it though. He lets them settle. He's just on his own doing it, which he would be years ago in the field, you know, like that. You get a young horse and sometimes he'll fidget a bit. Once they settle, especially if you've got one older one that's dominant, the younger ones will learn to go with the older one. Very often you have the steadiest one in the furrow. You've got a young horse, he sort of doesn't move too well on his feet, not so steady. You have him on what we call the land, that's the unploughed piece of ground. You've got to try and keep all the tops of the furrows nice and level across. So if you put a stick across, or the judge puts a stick across, they'd all touch the stick. That's one way of looking at it. Some of them just look at it and they got such a skilled eye, they can see whether it's level. The judge will have a look at that and have a look at the evenness and the straightness and the depth and all the rest of it. You try and adjust a little bit so that the last furrow up will just come over beautiful, and you lighten that up so that when you're doing your cultivating of the land afterwards, you haven't got great dips and rises, and there's points given for the finish, and that is really lovely to see, because you know that man has done a real good job, and his start was good, so his finish is usually good. Farming was all about ploughing. If you hadn't got a ploughman, you couldn't do anything really. And of course the carter and the horseman was your dominant man on the farm. He tended to hold sway over the cowman and everything else, because the cowman depended on him to grow the crops which the cattle had to have and that. The head carter on these big places were quite powerful people really. I mean, they may have had 6, 7, 8 men under them, each with a team of horses going out in the morning. And there was the head carter, and then there was the second man, third man, fourth man, you know, and then the least man, they called him, you know, which was usually the boy. Just started cleaning out the covered yard, ready for the annual harvest home, and we shall share a few hours in fairly unique company. The harvest home is a thing that happened probably all over the country years ago. When the Victorians came along, they got very strict about things. Things were put into churches rather than on the farms. And I thought, I must try and sort of revive this a bit, you know, so that people can see what it was like. The Morris dancing movement had revived as well. We got the Morris people involved, and they, of course, became the backbone of it, really. We started off with one Forest side, you know, the Forest Begin people. Then the Lassington Oak people, which was an offshoot of that. Probably the most we ever had was 5 or 6 sides dancing in the yard here. Well, we have it in early October, so we've got limited daylight. We can start, say, perhaps about 6 o'clock. Then we go on until it's dark. And we move into my covered yard where the cattle are in the winter. We usually have a little service, about 2 hymns, which we found that seems to be sufficient. Depending on the clergyman, I invite him to say a bit about harvest. Some of them have been really good. And they've really taken in the idea of it all. We had Canon John Evans. He was a great success.
We've always known that there would be food on the table. Certainly in our generation.
Moses said to Israel, "Each of you must place in a basket the first part of each crop that you harvest, and you must take it with you to the one place of work."
And then he blessed the loaves. We had some harvest loaves, which is a nice part of the proceedings as well, because that's of course where they finish up. The corn is grown in the land, and then it goes to the baker. It's been ground, and the flour is made into bread. That is very fundamental as well.
And this we ask for Jesus' sake. Amen. I like the swing in the last one. It's much better than an organ, isn't it? Much better. So you should come and play in the churches. That would be the best thing. People might come then.
Most people bring the puddings, that's their little bit towards it. They bring apple pies usually.
539! 539!
Although they aren't all from the local community, they're from what I call the harvest community. People that like joining in on those sort of things. And that goes on until it gradually fades. You get what we call the survivors there at the end. It is quite, I think, a precious part of the whole evening for the people who stay.
With my whistle and I sing, I sit upon my wagon and as happy as a king. My horse is always willing and me I'm never sad. There's none can lead a jollier life than in the darkness
A chap said to me, Bartlett, his name was, who was a duck man, and when he had poultry as well, and he opened it all to the public. Do something you love, he said to me. It's got to be fun, he said. If it isn't fun, don't bother to do it anymore. And I thought that really sums it all up, because there's so many people get locked into jobs which they thought were all right to start with, and then they just get in and they can't get out again. I've been like that. Come on here, you silly old fool, you are. You're a silly old fool. Yeah, you are. All right, don't get wound up. There, yeah. Yo.